Hello and welcome to JTV Instagram Live. I'm your host, Janette Burke. Today I am joined by Dr. Paula Perez. She is an educator, a speaker, and she's a coach. And she's from the company You Are Not Alone Coaching. Now, what makes this woman so interesting is that she teaches women how to be of service and date and love the way that God intended us to do this. So these are women of faith that follow. And I'm going to bring her on. Dr. Paula will join me in 1 second because I want her to tell us, ladies, you've got to listen to this incredible story. Dr. Paula made a commitment to herself, a vow at age 16 that she would not have any sexual relations until she was married. And that didn't happen for her until she turned 49 years old. She followed her own 4-step process to keeping to this commitment. And she's here to tell us all about it. So welcome to JTV Instagram Live, Dr. Paula Perez.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here, Janette. Looking
and
forward
I'm
to our time together.
Glad to have you. And I'm we had a little bit of tech issues previously, so that's all sorted.
Exactly.
So Dr. Paula, let's hear. You made a commitment to yourself at age 16 years old. That's a huge commitment that you made. And I want to know, how were you able to not just make it, but sustain it when boys came along and the dating opportunities were there? How did you keep this promise?
Well, first of all, when I made the promise, I thought I would be just like my parents. My parents married at 21 and 23. So why wouldn't that be my experience? So I didn't sign up to remain celibate until I was 49. I really thought it would happen sooner, but obviously didn't. I did date several guys, but they were not the right one. Was actually engaged to a young man. And that's a whole story I write about in my book, where I wound up buying my own engagement ring. Stupid.
What?
Yeah, girl.
Oh my God, no. Don't tell me that. Really?
Yes,
you couldn't get to a ring, man? The very least?
So what he did was he took me to a jewelry store. So we planned on getting married. I actually had my wedding dress. My bridesmaids had their dresses. I just didn't have a ring. So during the holidays, he took me to this jewelry store, and just like a scene out of the movie Sweet Home Alabama. Don't know if your viewers have seen that.
I love that movie.
When they go to the jewelry store, he did the same thing. Pick out whatever you want. So I picked out a ring. We get up to the register and he says, Paula, let me hold your credit card. And I don't work well under pressure. So even though things were going off in my head saying, don't do it, I did it.
And wow, then so you actually bought your own ring?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh,
sad, but
I hope you sold it.
Well, I was able to return it. About a month after that, where he proposed to me in front of my parents and friends, I woke up with this epiphany that he was not the one. So I was able to return the ring, thank God. But yeah, so I did some stupid things, but
the thing is, stupid or not, right? You didn't cave in. And so that's the part I really want to hear about. I think that's what my audience would like to hear about too. And then I have sort of a part 2 to that question. But
all right, so
how do you go through all that? How do you go through an engagement? How do you date somebody for that long and not cave in?
So for me, part of it is my faith. Because of my relationship with Christ, that was a decision that I made to please him. So my why was bigger than the desire to do anything. The other thing is, I remind people you can't miss what you haven't experienced. So if I had been sexually active before, I can see how that would be a struggle. But since I had not done anything other than kissing, it really didn't awaken that need to do it, because the purpose of sex, and I love my parents. When I was 11 years old, my mom, who's a nurse, sat me down and said, sex is great, when you have it, you don't want to have it all the time. She said, but God invented it for the purpose of marriage and keeping a husband and wife together. So, although, yes, you can do it, we would prefer that you not do it. And that's what God's word says. You should not do it till you get married. So, because again, of my love of my parents, my faithfulness to my walk with Christ, that was a decision I made. But to keep me from slipping, there's a lot of things that I did. Our mind is a powerful thing. And one of the things I said is, I'm going to filter what I take in. I remember, and I still remember this scene. I don't watch rated R movies because I don't want those images in my head. You can't act on what you haven't seen, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So that
Mm-hmm.
was one way. I filtered the type of music I listened to. I filtered what I read. I filtered what I watched. And then I talk about my 4-step process. So, number one, for me, STEP is an acronym. So, the S was for me to, first of all, show self love. I had to get to the point where I loved me. And after that ring experience, I realized, what about me would let that happen? That's a problem. So I really dealt with myself. I dealt with my insecurities and made sure I was whole, made sure that I loved me so much that I would not settle for less than I deserved. Second part, the T, for me is trusting in a higher power. And as I said, for me, that's Christ. So not only trusting, but trusting his plan and the process. I had to recognize that many times throughout my walk, I wasn't ready to be a wife. I wasn't a wife. I really feel that you should be walking in that before you get married. I feel that about every job. I always say to people, you should be doing the job before you get the job. So, in terms of being able to give of myself to another human being, I wasn't there yet. And even in our early years of marriage, my husband and I have now been married for a little over 13 years. And early on, I realized how selfish I was. In the marriage relationship, really, we talk about iron sharpening iron. I
Mm-hmm.
got to the point where, because of the way we rubbed one another, it either is going to make us worse or make us better. And because of our commitment to one another, we allowed it to make us better. The next letter in STEP is the importance of embracing others, empowering others. And as an educator, I've done so many things. I worked at IBM for almost 10 years, but then felt called to go back to what I went to school for, education. So I've taught, I was principal, I started youth programs, I worked
Mm-hmm.
with single women that desired to be married and was able to be of support. So that empowering piece filled something in me so that I didn't feel lonely. I didn't feel a lot of those emotions. Now, it took me a while to get there. And what helped me to get there is the P, pursuing my purpose. And as an educator, I love to pour into people. I love to teach truths. I love to support and to encourage. So, all of the things that I've lived through have now become a part of my story. And I've been able to teach others as a result of it.
Okay, so let's go back a little bit because you have said quite a bit, and now I'm going to poke some questions in there. Okay. So, my first question is, okay, you are a person of faith. So, I would assume then you would have to date someone who was also a person of faith in order for them to be on the same wavelength and path that you are on, and even be supportive and understanding of your choice not to have sexual relations. My question is, I understand your commitment to yourself and I understand how you got there. And I'm pretty sure you did a good job explaining it to my audience that they would understand it too. What I don't understand, or it's not that I don't understand, I guess I'm wondering, I guess the curiosity part of me is coming out. And I think maybe my audience might have the same thought, is that, you're dating these men. Sure, they may be men of faith, but they're still men and men have urges. how receptive were they to this choice? And were they trying to, let's say, get you
Flower me.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I was trying to find a nice way of putting it. Yes. Were they trying to sway you to go the distance? Let's put it that way.
So I have had different experience early on in my 20s, 30s. I did have experience. In fact, in my book, I share a story when I first went to college and how I wound up being alone in a guy's apartment. We started off with a crowd of people, but we were alone. And in that moment, we started kissing and then changed our position from vertical to horizontal. And then the guy jumped up and said, "You got to go, Paula." And I was so naive. I didn't know what was happening. So there were times when I would put myself in positions, and it was nothing but the grace of God that got me out of it. So he used the guy in that situation. There have been times when, after getting to know me, the men realized my stance, and then I would call it off. My husband, and I share this in the book as well. There was a day we were riding in the car, and my husband says, "Oh, I have everything that I wanted, or almost everything." And I mean, what do you mean almost? This is when we were engaged. He said, "Well, you have all the characteristics, but my prayer was that the Lord will give me somebody that was a virgin." And I said, "Well, what makes you think that I'm not?" And he said, "You are?" Of course, now I'm 49. And he said, "I don't know anybody in the church or out of the church that is." But that was a desire of his. So, of course, he supported me in my desire. And we put guardrails there to make sure that we would not slip up.
So, because you brought this up, I'm going to have to jump in and make this comment too. I think it perfectly lends to itself. I mean, today it's hard to be single. And yet so many people marry for the wrong reasons and wind up divorced, maybe multiple divorce, right? But then the pressure to have sex is there. And then there's this other thing, sort of a negative stereotype or a stigma, if you will, that something's wrong with you if you're not having sex, or that if you would wait till 49. I mean, after that movie, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, there was a stigma there. And I think people are afraid to say, I'm not going to jump into bed with you. Actually, sometimes, women, and I want you to comment on this in one sec, women sometimes are afraid that they're going to lose a guy if they don't have sex. And there's that pressure, or that that's our role, or that having the sex is going to keep the guy or even get him to say, "I'll marry you." Let's hear some commentary from you on these
Definitely.
on these situations,
Yeah.
and tell us what we can do to combat some of this stuff.
Again, that's why the very first step in my 4-step framework is the importance of loving yourself. We give in to those types of arguments when we feel threatened, when we feel like, oh, we're going to miss out on something. When we get to the point where we love ourselves, where we know who we are, we know the gift that we are, we won't devalue ourselves. I shared how my parents, or my mom in particular, talked to me about sex. An analogy that she used was that I was like fine china. And she pointed to our china cabinet. She said, "Paula, we don't eat off of these every day, right? We use it for special occasions. I want you to consider your body that way." So that whole self-love, that ability to be able to stand in your own truth in what you value is important. The other thing that has been a motivation for me, because I have worked with thousands of children. I was a principal, I was a teacher, I did a lot of things. I had my own youth groups. I have seen the fallout of our decisions as an adult that are in the moment. I have seen the fallout when, well, it was just one time, and then you wind up getting pregnant. And then that child has to suffer because of your inability to control yourself. And as a Christ follower,
That's if it's even born, right? Because some of the aftermath of consequences is abortion.
Yes. That's another thing. I pray that people will check out my book. drpaulacperez.com is where they can find information. But in my book, I share a story about one of my relatives being raped. And she made the decision not to abort. Now, I'm not going to go political or anything, but one of the things my book talks about is God's grace. We had a history in our family of unwed births. And I remember when a particular family member got pregnant, an attitude of like, how dare you mess up our family name? That type of thing. And then I had to be reminded that, girl, you ain't perfect. If but for the grace of God, you could be in the same position. And what about love? What about grace to her in this time? What about being there to support her in this situation, in this season, and to be there to help support the child? But because of my love of kids, I did not want to do anything that might have a irreparable harm to a child, because as an educator, I've really seen the fallout of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences.
Okay. And I understand what you're saying. It's all valid and true. Of course, in the case of rape, though, that is not necessarily a choice to have sex. That's somebody forcing sex on you. So that's a different scenario, right?
Correct.
That is a different scenario.
And in my
really
other book,
more talking about, or what the aim of this interview is, are people who are having sex willingly or under pressure and not staying true to themselves and their own values. And my question is, so what can you teach them about staying true to themselves and their own values in the face of a society that is, pretty promiscuous, in the face of movies, TV, music, even advertising, where women are very sexualized and at a young age, and where a lot of women today feel that if they don't have sex at a young age, and I'm talking very young because I can quote you stories,
12, 13.
Exactly. Of girls that are, pressured like that at school, at camp, at other places, and then that just continues right on up until their 20s. Or what about these young girls today that want to be sugar mama? They want a sugar papa, rather, and they
sugar
want
daddy. The sugar
daddy. So what do you have to say about all these things, and how does it all work out when you don't have sort of a faith of, when you're not, let's say, a person of faith, but you still want to maintain your value?
It's hard if you don't have faith, because I really attribute a lot of that to the self-control that came as a result of the Spirit of God being within me. But I have seen, you talk about young girls. I personally know a 10-year-old that had a baby. So I know that it happens. And I remember when I wrote my first book, the 49-year-old virgin book, one of my nieces coming to me, we were away together in Puerto Rico, and she said, it's one of my husband's nieces, so niece by marriage. She said, Paula, I'm so glad that you wrote this, because she's a virgin, but her friends don't know it, because just like you said, the pressure. So she talks like she has had intercourse, but she hasn't. So what I would say is there are more people out there than you know that have not bowed to the pressure. So one of the tricks of the enemy, I believe, is to make us think everybody's doing it. Everybody's doing it. Well, that's not the case. I'm living proof. I had nephews that are 34 and 29 that have chosen not to have sex until they get married. And they have not got married yet, so they haven't had sex yet. So it is a myth that everybody is doing it. I would encourage people to surround themselves with like-minded people, to surround themselves with a coach. And that's one of the things I do in my coaching program, to provide that emotional, psychological support that people need when they are struggling with that pressure, And then
Or what about if they're just struggling with the fact that they're very attracted to the person and it's really hard, or they're, fooling around a little bit and it's really hard not to go to the next step?
it is definitely hard not to
How
go
do you
to the
how
next
do
step.
you coach them on that? Like they're in a dating relationship, perhaps it's been going on some time, several years. They are not having intercourse, but they are fooling around, and every time it
With
gets
every
harder and
other
harder
kind
to
of
get out.
sex. Yep.
Yeah.
Oral, anal, all of that. For me, all of it is sex. And I personally chose not to do any of that because I knew it would make it harder for me if I did engage in those activities. So again, I would encourage them to think about what is it you want. So for 15 minutes of pleasure, if you're lucky, just plain. It is it worth sacrificing possibly your future, possibly your health, possibly even the
Mm-hmm.
relationships? Because so many women that I know, once they give in, once they're no longer a challenge, the guy loses interest anyway. And that's the heartbreaking part. When you give your most valuable part of you over to someone that for you, you were just a check off the buckle, and to be able to say, I conquered her.
Mm-hmm.
So
So, what about self gratification? Do you
mhm,
believe in that?
I chose not to do it. And I talk about that in the book because all of that opens up the sexual desire. So if your aim is
Mm-hmm.
not to have sex until you get married, I would encourage people not to do that. After you get married, it's a totally different story. But
Okay. And what about, because we're nearing the end of the interview, I
okay.
do have a couple other questions. So the longer you wait, like in your case, you waited till you were 49 years old. Some people would not be able to wait that long,
Mhm.
right? For different reasons. One reason might be that they want to become mothers, right? So they might give in because they want to have a baby. Maybe it's really the baby they want more than the husband or the sex.
Mhm.
Comment, please.
And that's something that many churches are dealing with because many women that are in their 40s have the financial means to be able to take care of children. So I know and have heard of stories of people having in vitro fertilization, doing it in that way to have their own children. Others have chosen to adopt children instead.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
can understand how all of these things are going to be facing people of faith when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to supporting, encouraging people that may enter their doors. And I really believe, again, in the grace of God. And the Bible talks about we see the outer, but we don't know what's on a person's heart. We don't know what, is driving, what the motivations are. So thank God for his grace. I believe that it is easier when you choose not to do those things to be able to abstain from sex. But if we fall, if we have sex outside of marriage, I believe in God's grace. And if your desire is to have a relationship that is aligned with what he wants for your life, you'll be able to carry on. And life can still be wonderful. Life can
Mm-hmm.
still be joyous. You can still really enjoy a husband, you can enjoy your children, and be able to live the life that you desire to live.
Okay, so one last point here, okay, because I really have to close out. We're nearing the end. Um, what if somebody's in a committed relationship, living together, but not legally married, but in an exclusive, committed, long-term relationship? Would that be still a woman of faith, living in faith, having sex uh, in a marital type of situation, or do they absolutely have to have that paper that says, yeah, you're married?
For me, it's the paper. For me, it is the commitment that under this law, we live in this society, that marriage is a part of it. So I would never cohabitate and never
Mm-hmm.
did. I would not put myself in a situation where I would be tempted to have sex with someone that was not my husband. And for me,
But in
that,
those situations, common law, after 2 years, they're considered your husband.
oh, really? See, now I'm not aware of that. And for me, it is about that ceremony, whether it's the justice of the peace, whether you're doing it at a church, whatever the situation is. That is something for me. That's what I held on to. That's what my value was. And for my purposes, the foundation for my decision making was what was in the Bible. So that
Okay.
is what.
So as
Mhm.
we close out here, I got two things. One, we're going to say we're going to give you the shameless promotion with your book and your website name. But before we do that, I want to give my audience who is watching this, could be in this position, may not even be a woman of faith, but may be tired of being used by men, or doesn't want to have sex, doesn't know what to say to the guy because maybe she really likes the guy, maybe he's a good guy, and maybe he's thinking it strange that they're not having sex, or maybe he's making comments or whatever. What could she say to maintain herself and her decision without you know risking losing the guy or having the relationship completely cut off? What
I
is
per
one thing that they could say?
One of the things that I often think about is true love desires to give and not get. The guy that's pressuring is selfish. The guy that is trying to force you to have sex with him is only thinking about his needs. And if he is not man enough to guard your heart, maybe you should consider a different person.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, what is the one thing they could say, like, just to brace the subject, or he's making advances and she, maybe doesn't know what to say, that I have made this choice. Tell us something that, is tangible that we could say, hey, I've made this choice. What is a way to verbalize that?
I think if we talk about the fact that one of our values and one of the gifts we want to be able to give to our husband is our body, I think that's a way to approach it. Because if we value that person enough that we want to give ourselves to him and only him, I would think a man would be able to accept that. And if they're not, you really need to consider, do you really want to be with him? Because this is just one area. If they are selfish there, they're selfish in other areas as well. And a
That's
true
true.
man,
Like having you buy your own ring. Okay, so I think this is all wonderful. I want to just, as we close out, name your book, please, for us. The
two
title of your
books.
book.
The two
Two
books. The
books.
first book is 49-Year-Old Virgin,
Okay.
Delayed, Not Denied. And the second
Mhm.
book is Boundaries, Saving Yourself Until Marriage. And in that book,
Okay.
I
And
give
now
you
both books can be found on the website. Please
correct.
state your website. Of course, guys, this is all going to appear in the show notes with links. Go ahead, Paula, Dr. Paula, say your website for us.
My website is Dr. as in doctor, Dr. Paula C. My middle name is C. Perez, Perez, drpaulacperez.com. And the books are also available on Amazon. You can order them at Barnes and Noble, etc.
Okay. So thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Paul. It's been a riveting conversation. And I want to thank my dear audience for taking the time to join us today, too. Please remember to like and comment and share us with all your family and friends. This is Janette Burke, your host for JTV Instagram Live, signing off. You can catch us every Wednesday with a new topic, a lifestyle topic by a book author, a speaker, a coach, consultant, or small business owner that is meant to enlighten and lift you, your spirits, and really give you some knowledge to grow with. So check us out every Wednesday. The link for them live to follow us is also in the show notes below. And until next time, thanks so much for being with us. Bye for now.
Bye.